our latest MAEKAN session, we moved the show to London and discussed the topic of authenticity in media. London has been an inspiration to the team for some time. The city has been an important driver of globally relevant subcultures with a keen understanding of the world of media. This relationship has always been a delicate balance that they seem to understand. What spawned this topic was an examination of how brands and media outlets are increasingly interconnected. And with brand participation comes an examination of authenticity. What influence will brands play in a media outlet's ability to authentically communicate their thoughts and ideas? Or simply, will most brands that succeed understand how to gain traction before opening the doors to brand participation? They included Ari Stein of 52 Insights, a publication focused on interviewing scientists, artists, futurists, and celebrities shaping the world. Tom Brandhurst of Copa 90, a popular football/TV platform, and Iona Golder of Kyra TV, a video-centric platform that focuses on youth culture through travel, food, and fashion. A big thanks to MAEKAN member Tom Kirkby of Breaks, who secured an amazing venue in Soho House Dean Street. Breaks, for those unfamiliar, is a creative house focused on innovative campaigns, social-first content, events, and experiences with forward-thinking clients. Overall, the cozy space paired with some solid panelists made for an interesting discussion and a memorable evening we won't soon forget. As always, it was great to put a name to a face within the MAEKAN community, as we look to do more and more MAEKAN sessions around the world.
Before we get started, I wanted to obviously highlight our panelists who were gracious enough to provide some time out of their busy schedules. Maybe we can start with Ari, or maybe even then. We have Ari, Iona, and Tom. But we can start with Ari. Maybe you can give us a little bit of insight into what you do, your background.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me as well. So my name's Ari Stein. I'm the founding editor of an online magazine only called 52 Insights. I started this kind of idea about 3 years ago. Started in a garage in Hackney. And the idea behind it was to kind of build this website where we interview one significant person a week and we profile their body of work. People always say, you know, what is 52 Insights? Some kind of automatically get it, but obviously it makes sense, one a week. Our primary kind of goal was to explore the divide between popular culture and science, because my idea is that I was a fan of all the style, fashion, entertainment kind of channels, and I was equally as fascinated by the science, tech, philosophy, academia channels. And I just thought, is there such a way that we could combine them all and bring all these people together? So I'm quite proud of kind of what I've built. Being a very, very small independent media company takes a lot of balls and a lot of grit and more than blood, sweat and tears. I wish there was a fourth one, because it's just incredible how much work gets put into it. So, you know, some of the people we interview is Jake Gyllenhaal and Usain Bolt and Yuval Noah Harari, just to kind of give you an idea. And we also have an event agency attached to that where we kind of create kind of intellectually stimulating content for brands, because we're in an age where every industry is being disrupted and they all want to know the answers to the world, but no one has them. So we're trying to kind of ask those questions by bringing in a fascinating confluence of people from around the world to kind of provide those in provocative settings. Sorry.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Iona?
Hi, I'm Iona Golder. I'm one of the creatives and directors at Kyra TV. We're a youth-focused TV network, kind of like MTV for Gen Z. We've got 3 shows. One is a fashion-focused show, one is cooking, and one is travel and adventure. Short and sweet.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks. Tom?
Hello. I'm Tom. I'm the editorial director of Copa 90. Copa 90 is a football media business that predominantly focuses on our online football publisher. So we create content for football fans, predominantly or originally around YouTube, across all other digital spaces as well now. Anything from more youth-orientated interview content to longer form documentaries that go into more sort of mature, serious topics, and sort of anything in between that satisfies a football audience.
Okay. So I'm going to start things off super simple. what role does brand play within media currently in your guys' respective businesses? Maybe we'll start with you, Tom.
So yeah, of course, making lots of wonderful content is expensive and requires someone to pay for it. And one of the obvious ways of having that money come in is through branded content. I think Copper 90, I'd say about 3 or 4 years ago, started dabbling with branded content with the first deals that we've made. People like HTC, Nissan that wanted to do a series or a few films that would really resonate with a young football fan audience, and they could just badge in a really simple brought to you by Nissan, brought to you by HTC sort of way. Since then, we've developed partnerships that have really sort of spiraled into bigger things, and now we have partnerships with Adidas, with Pepsi, with various other brands. We're doing some work with Uber at the moment as well. They're all they range from as simple as a badging exercise and just putting their logo at the front of a video to really bespoke content which takes into account their brief, their objectives, and tries to hit that.
Yeah. What about you, Iona?
So similarly to Copper 90, Kyra works with brands. Often integration is a big part of what we do, and kind of being super transparent and upfront with how we work with brands and how we integrate them into our content is a big part of our offering both to our audience and to the brands we partner with. So sort of whether it's Adidas and how we build them into an episode we do, or HP, a travel printer we work with across 3 episodes on our travel show. It's a really kind of integrated offering in that sense.
Yeah. What about you, Ari?
So I'm going to be quite transparent here. I feel like I'm the odd one out on the panel, to be totally honest with you. I think that the dynamic between the brand and the content world is continually evolving. And I personally feel like brands are more willing to work with that certain sector of age groups. They feel a little bit more comfortable that it's going to kind of permeate into their audience because they think that they're going to buy what's put in front of them. I mean, it's the same for everyone, but they just think it's easier, more easily distracted for young people. So I'm not saying that our brand is different, but we do cater to a little bit more of a mature audience, 18 to 35 and up as well. To date, we haven't worked that much with brands. We've worked in little bits and pieces, but I still feel like our design or our principle of what we're trying to do is still in stealth mode. So, yeah.
Yeah, my question to that would be, and this sort of rolls back into authenticity, is that, I've had the chance to interact with Ari a few times the last few days, and he definitely has a really strong point of view, and that sort of makes me wonder, how does what you want to say and your point of view, how do you anticipate that interacting with brands down the line? Should you pursue that route more heavily?
You asking me?
Yeah.
So sorry, I get caught up in the data.
Yeah.
What was the question again?
So more along the lines
Thinking about my answer.
Yeah. So more along the lines of you yourself have a very strong opinion, strong point of view.
Yeah.
Should you pursue more branded partnership opportunities? Do you worry that you're going to be stifled?
No, not at all. Any brands that want to meet me after, I'm happy to talk to them.
I guess more like your editorial lens and how you.
It's an evolving discussion. I mean, I honestly feel like I started with the canvas first, meaning I was an artist first. So it was what would happen if we interviewed the world's most famous people? And I didn't really think about the product-orientated vertical inside the magazine. So it went through many iterations over the years, and I think of the magazine more as a lifestyle. So building a hotel under the name 52 Insights, or a car, whatever it is, I'd be happy to work with the brand, as long as the brand doesn't, totally destroy what we're about. Finding the right brand, that won't change anyway, because if you're working with them and they want to work with you, they'll understand what your brand is about. So, yeah.
What about you, Iona? When it comes to having a point of view and knowing that, you're working heavily with brands and they are maybe subtly influencing what you can and cannot say. How does that influence the creative side of it all?
Wait, what's specifically the question?
Yeah, when it comes to having a brand involved in the content creation or being involved in some way, how does that potentially influence the output?
Yeah, I think brands inevitably have messages that they're trying to communicate with their audiences. And I guess to the point about how someone like Ari works and how that might differ from Kyra or Copper 90, it's, their audience, there are numbers and they're kind of audience focused, and I suppose it kind of comes back to that. There's an access to an audience that they think that their message will resonate with, and it's a balance.
Yeah. And for you at Copa90, have you found that what you were able to create is actually bolstered by the fact that brand is behind it, versus if you were just to go rogue and do an editorial project?
I think it works both ways. So as an example, we made a film last year about Calcio Storico, which is a quite niche event that happens in Florence in Italy. It's essentially a medieval sport where it's meant to be like football, but people can fight each other as well. And it's quite, Vice has done a documentary as well. We did one as well. But the reason we made it and we could actually make it was because Le Coq Sportif make the Fiorentina football kit. They wanted to activate the latest kit, which had 4 different versions for 4 different sort of boroughs of the city. And they said, look, we'll fund you to go there, make it, and as long as you just sort of like mention us in it and it has the product in it. And obviously the product was fine because it was part of what people were wearing, and the football fans, it was very natural integration. So we got to make that, and that was great, and that film's been perfect. Like, we really proud of what we made there. And the other end of the spectrum is, of course, just being very careful about how you talk about things in acknowledgement of a brand, and making sure that you aren't pissing off certain people. And I think what you're getting at there in terms of it perhaps stifling creativity, I think it's inevitable that it's going to be, you're not going to get away with doing a large campaign with a big player like Paul Pogba and then making a film about how shit Paul Pogba is the next day. Even just from a very simple, the player's going to be pissed off perspective, it does sort of affect you in that way. So I think there are, I wouldn't say eggshells, but there are considerations that be had when you're having brand partnerships. And
So when it comes to those brand partnerships, what do you think makes for an ideal client? Like, maybe starting with you, Ari.
We have the ideal brand in mind that we'd like to work with. People always say to us, again, like, I don't want to sound like a broken record, we've worked with a number of brands like Nike, Design Hotels, Tempur and stuff. But in terms of like creating a brand project, I would like to have similar principles. So sophistication, a similar outlook on life. So, brands that share a similar lifestyle to us. But again, I don't have a huge repository of projects and brands that I've worked with yet in order to kind of understand that ecosystem very well.
do you think you turn down people then if they didn't share the values that you share?
Fuck no. As I'm saying, like, I'd love to work with brands. I'm just gonna be honest, like, as I said, like, I think brands have very different discussions with different channels. So we worked with Nike a bunch of times, but that was purely editorial. Probably not supposed to be saying this, but and it wasn't like a financial kind of operation. So it was purely editorial. So we were, and they really like our sophistication, style, and element stuff. So they enjoy that, and they reach out to a particular audience that they can't, perhaps that you can, that we can't, and vice versa. So yeah.
I suppose it's like, it kind of always comes back a bit with like editorial and brand partnerships. You get to establish yourself or your tone of voice or your like aesthetic, whatever it is, in your editorial, and you hope that brands come to you because of that, because of the precedent you set with your editorial work. And it's kind of, like chicken and egg, I suppose.
I totally agree, yeah.
I just want to do a quick poll. For you guys in the audience right now, how many of you guys have an issue when you see an ad from, like, an editorial ad, not saying like an in-feed ad, but like, oh, this is a campaign sponsored by brand XYZ. So very few people have an issue. And do you think that this is the new norm? And like, maybe this is a follow-up question too, is like, do you think that, 10 years ago, people would have an issue with an ad being placed in their stream? Or maybe that's the wrong question to ask. Maybe it's too confusing.
Is it about that it's sponsored by somebody, or just in general an ad?
I guess in general, the fact that it's an ad that a publisher is doing. Yeah. Because I think that one thing that I find interesting is that for me, and this is dating myself, I'm like 33, 34. So looking back 10 years ago, like, I used to hate it when people were like hard selling me. And now I think there's a new normalization that exists within that, and we all become so accustomed to being sold to. So my question is, do you think that the current generation, some of you guys deal more with that quote unquote Gen Z millennial demographic. Do you think they have a general openness towards brands? Maybe start with you, Iona. Sorry.
Yeah, I would say that like massively there's a shift even between somebody in their like late 20s to someone who's 17. I think there's like an adoption from like say Gen Z.
Do you want to maybe define Gen Z in terms of like age bracket?
I think it's like, it seems to be like often debated, but like Gen Z up to age 20 and millennial 20 to 35.
Can I just say one really small thing here?
Yeah.
I think part of the issue is, and feel free to jump and beat me up, but part of the problem of this whole brand ecosystem communication is they obsess about different demographics. So the Gen Z, Gen Y, Gen Q, Gen R, I don't know, make up whatever you want. And it constantly becomes this thing like how new, how young, how can we get to them? Obviously, it's like not super pivotal to me.
I do agree that it's like an obsession, and like that's why I always use air quotes, but it's not really to be air quoted. But I think the reality is like it is completely different. Like the way all you have to do is sit down with 50 or to 100 16, 17-year-olds, and then 50 to 100 21, 22-year-olds, and like the way they think, what they want from content, the kind of content they are consuming is absolutely different. And I think that if you're a brand, inevitably you're going to, it's kind of easier to define it with like a label, and you're inevitably going to want to kind of cater what content you're sponsoring or what content you're like aligning with, so that you're aligning with your audience. Yeah, I think it's quite logical.
Yeah. I mean, my point to that, I agree. In a more ideal circumstance, you would probably do psychoanalytics or like psychographic analytics, where it's more like a perspective or the way someone views life. But I do agree there's probably something a little bit cleaner about just like grouping people by age.
Yeah, I guess you could say it's exposure to certain platforms, and technology is obviously basically the main consideration in that.
Yeah. Did you have something you wanted to add, Tom?
I was only going to go on back to your previous point about sponsored or branded content, and Copper90, because we appeal to all football fans, that ranges from like 15-year-olds to 40-year-olds, and I think it's good because we can see the different reaction to branded stuff. And I think Iona will agree with me in terms of her channel. Young people are so accustomed to it, it's like second nature. They don't really care. And I'm not saying like we can get away with it, but I'm saying that when an athlete is sat there wearing a Call of Duty t-shirt, maybe people in the audience or me and others will think, oh God, that's clearly blatant. They're just branding themselves. This interview is a piece of branded content. Young kids, it's just like a way of life. It's like, oh yeah, I'm used to seeing every athlete, every superstar I know and love wearing a brand, so it doesn't feel like a big deal. And also in a more positive sense, so we have a show with two presenters called Poet and Vuj, who are young guys who from North London, from Tottenham, and they grew up and wanted to become presenters, and through both Copper90 and their own means off their own backs, they sort of made it. And I think a lot of people see them as like the embodiment of being able to actually make it in the media world. They have a lot of brand affiliations, and I think for them, when our audience see that, they're like, they've made it. Branded content or branded affiliation is like you've actually hit the big time, and so it's actually seen as positive in some aspects.
Do you guys think there's a certain responsibility from the publisher standpoint, knowing if you can continually optimize towards selling things to a certain demographic, are you going to like, how do you know there's a line to be drawn there, or is there really a line that has yet to be found? So like maybe I want to start with Ari, because I think maybe this is outside your traditional sort of realm of like, is there a certain responsibility, an ethical responsibility selling to potentially a younger demographic?
I'm not sure I 100% understand, but
So like, it's more along the lines of, if you have the opportunity to sell to people who are so open to being sold to, where is the line drawn? Or is there no line to be drawn?
I mean, the way I feel about it personally as a publisher is that, everyone's hustling, and we're all part of a socially mutually kind of exclusive contract. So we're all agreeing to it. Once we all hate ads, we'll block them. The ad blocker thing never really came in as much as people said it would. So we all, as kind of some kind of, agreeing about what's acceptable and what's not. So as a publisher, I'm happy when I see, a more youthful market reading, parts of the mag, as well as an older, parts of the audience. I guess it's up to the original publisher what constitutes as crossing a line, or what doesn't. We'll always rest on our laurels, and we'll always have morals about what constitutes as 52 insights. As Tom will have, what steps outside the boundaries. You won't feel comfortable, and the same with the IONO. I can't speak for them, but yeah.
Do you guys have sort of a running dialogue in your head of what those parameters look like? Maybe start with you. I don't know.
I think that there's a fine line. I think transparency is really important, and I think that we're in or entering an age where transparency, especially when working with brands, is like highly valued and actually expected of an audience. So I think that perhaps before and certainly with like big, I don't know, say Vice, stuff you'd see on Vice, you could kind of get away with just having a logo at the beginning of whatever you were doing and that kind of being defining how you'd work with the brand. But I think younger audiences sort of expect much more transparency. I think that's, it's a two-way relationship, I think.
Yeah.
Is that transparency, so when you're doing branded stuff, how does it look? Are you quite overt about it, or are you quite subtle?
Yeah, I think completely overt in the first however many seconds in the title, if needs be. There is it's working with a brand, and I think in the way that we work at Kyra, it's collaborative with brands. Like I think there's a real respect from them in terms of what we're doing and what we're trying to do, and for us staying true to that is really important, and so our audience up front know what we're doing. It's not kind of like slapping a logo on or like at the end or in the middle. It's brought into being through the help.
Right?
Yeah.
I think that's it. That's interesting. You're right. The collaborative nature of it is very similar for us as well, in that we don't see it as being like you're buying space on our channel. We see it as we're collaborating. The issue, or perhaps like the problem to solve off the back of that, is because it is a collaborative nature and seen as a partnership, you do feel like you've got editorial responsibility to keep that brand happy, not just across, say you do a film where it's like, okay, this is clearly an Adidas thing, we make it overt. On the next film, it's almost like, okay, do you reset and go back to editorial integrity and, okay, we're going to slag off an Adidas athlete now? Or do you actually say, do you know what, it's that collaborative nature means that it's really hard to maintain a brand or client relationship where you do act negatively towards their properties or their products. So yeah, I guess that's the challenge for us really, in making sure you get those relationships right.
Do you ever wonder that if you continue along a very sort of vanilla path, that at some point you might lose your audience because they never get the full meal deal, like they never get the reality of the situation?
Yeah, I'm a strong believer that your audience can't be defined by branded. You can't build an audience off of branded partnerships or branded content. Like no one has ever done that. And so, like, to build an audience, you have to have a strong editorial vision, a strong editorial direction. And if you kind of veer too far away from that, you will inevitably sort of, I think, lose either lose your audience or lose respect from your audience or loyalty from your audience.
Yeah, exactly. Like, opinion and subjectivity is what made us appealing in the first place. Two geezers from North London sat on a sofa chatting shit about football, saying whatever they want, in whatever way they want, was why people wanted to watch it. If they're then told like, oh yeah, you can't say this and you can't say this, after a while it's going to be like, well, I might as well go watch Match of the Day where it's equally as dry. So yeah, I think it's a dangerous line to tread, and there is definitely a way you can get it right. It's just making sure that your existing relationships with those brands and those clients are set up in a way that you can work in tandem.
Do you think there needs to be a clear division between what is branded partnership work and what is editorial work? Do you need to kind of have a church and state element there, or does your guys' product allow for the crossroads of those two and they can live together?
I personally think operating like as a company with the kind of church and state attitude towards kind of commercial and creative is what sort of, I think the outcome of that is this sort of like slapping a brand on the front or like a logo somewhere or product. You know, like, I think it is quite unauthentic or untransparent. I think you need to have a kind of cohesive relationship between your commercial team and your creative team in order to get these kinds of collaborative, you know, whatever, whether it's series or individual episodes.
I mean, to be honest with you, like, we're all building brands ourselves anyway. So, like, I have a brand, you have a brand, your brand. So, you know, engineering a brand itself is delivered on certain principles. And whether those principles can have an aligned discussion with another brand, it can work. But I would probably argue that, you know, maybe, I don't know, any major newspaper out there, the media industry is dying. Everyone hears about it every day. You know, the clickages are going down. So you have a room and a space for younger channels, more independently mobile channels to kind of rise up and provide, you know, content for space. And so, you know, maybe some newspapers would jump at the chance for a brand to kind of buy their whole space. I mean, you hear about moguls buying out whole newspapers and stuff, and some people irk about it. But in this day and age, they might be very receptive to that. So I really think it depends on like how you've built it, what your principles are, where you're looking to head for the future. If you're keen on not having any brand involvement at all, I think you're a little bit stupid, and I don't think that's where the future, you know, is inherently made up of. But you know, that's just what I think. Yeah.
Just something to add, Tom?
A couple of things I was going to, in reference to that, we were talking earlier about Broadly and how that's kind of that example of fully branded facilitating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, different way.
we were talking earlier about entirely brand, sort of like from the beginning brand sponsored channels, and I talked about Broadly, which I'm sure most of you know is Vice's female, like Vice for girls, basically Vice for women, smart women, and it was entirely funded by, I think, Unilever or Procter & Gamble, I can't remember, but I think, you know, an example of a channel being launched from like zero, from, you know, being sponsored by a brand and quite successfully. I think there was a real, you know, built up by Vice's reputation already, but a real respect for the kind of journalistic integrity and what like a Vice channel looks like, and there was a lot of freedom to do really good journalistic reporting, and yeah, it's a good example.
Yeah, I think we didn't have that same approach, so we started as a publisher without any branded involvement, grew, and then brought brands on board. So I think in reference to what you said about church and state, I actually think that for us, because football's very unique, and it depends on the publisher. If you've got 3 shows, like it's different to say, I mean, it's more work, but like we have shows, and then we also have a 24/7 newsroom across all platforms. And as a result, I think it is important to have church and state in that aspect. Otherwise, it becomes unclear as to like, oh, the Man United have scored a goal and they're talking about Paul Pogba positively. Is that because Adidas sponsor them, or is that because they actually think that? I think having those buckets where it's like, okay, it's clearly this is now the piece of content by the brand for us makes a lot of sense. Otherwise, it becomes a bit, problematic.
Is that particularly difficult because, like, so I don't know that much about football sponsorship, but it's obviously like, interwoven in so many different aspects of it. Is that particularly difficult to like untangle? It
is really hard to untangle, especially like at the start when it was just, okay, it's Adidas, straightforward, but now it's Adidas, it's Pepsi, it's other brands. I mean, obviously every brand that sponsors a major tournament, whether it's Heineken or Nissan or Hyundai, whoever, like you start to get to a stage where you're very cautious of just making sure that they know the line of like, okay, this is the work we're doing for you on our channel, and this is us objectively, editorially talking about the news and the football news and the agenda that's going on there.
How do you like draw lines, or how do you make it clear if it's important to make it clear?
I think it's partly in the relationship and it's partly in our tone of voice. So I think generally, actually, this is something interesting. Recently, we had a bit of a debate around, we were going to make a joke about a football player who'd had a bad game of football, and it was quite a personal laddie joke, which isn't really our tone of voice anyway. And I was talking to the brand team and I was like, look, we know that player's on Adidas's books, that's going to go down badly, and had a bit of a debate. And it was like, well, do you know what? In all honesty, like, we shouldn't be doing that anyway. and that's not really who we are. And as a precaution, rather than make things personal and being so negative all the time, let's find another solution which both kills two birds with one stone. One in making sure the brand relationship is intact and like we're not doing anything negative there, even though like they may not have an issue with it. It's just not worth the risk. And then also just like as a general, not being too lofty point about the media being negative, football media particularly can be incredibly negative, and as soon as someone has a bad game, even if they're a 16-year-old kid who like you can't really have a go at someone who's that age playing professional football, can go really negative on their back. I think it was a good chance for us to say like, yeah, we're actually be positive. Sorry, I've gone on a massive tangent.
No, all good. Ari, I'm curious for you and how you're kind of setting up 52 Insights to be sort of brand ready. Is there a sort of strategy that you had to adopt or change to make it more product driven, I guess, so that people can understand and get behind it?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's learning and education. I think that, as I said, like one of the earlier things I said is that I started with a canvas. So I didn't really understand the brand world so much, so to speak. I still don't completely and fully understand it. And I'm not afraid to say that. I think people are often like, I understand everything and what's going on, but sometimes it feels a little bit drowned out. So for me, I think it's been definitely an iteration process and an evolutionary process. What that means is that, where the magazine started, I'm amazed like at all the people that we interview. It's absolutely amazing, but that only gets you to a certain point. Then you want to start talking to brands. How can you attract a brand and how can you monetize the content that you've made? And they've done it great, like Tom and Iona. And I'm not saying, I haven't, but I'm probably at a stage still where I'm building up that model. What is attractive? What are the parts that we can unpack, that we can serve to brands? What are the sales points that we can, sit down and talk about? Can we do events? Can we do, a brand deal with, a sophisticated watch brand or whatever? I mean, there are millions of things, but it's about actually getting to that point where you're very clear about, what we can serve up as a brand. And we're definitely much more defined now than we were 3 years ago when we started. So it's definitely an evolutionary process, yeah.
Once you've sort of entered this space around, of a sort of advertising-driven editorial approach, what do you think is the future? Or is it sort of like you've entered a state where it's kind of established what you can and cannot do, versus like if you never take an advertisement-driven approach, you're always thinking. Like, what is the future for you guys in terms of advertisements and editorial? Advertorial, basically, yeah.
Do you want to go first? I'll go first.
Is it something that doesn't really cross your mind, or is it like I'm just curious, like, is it a dumb question, or is there something there that is uncertain in terms of the future?
I think from our point of view, things keep chugging along the way they currently are. People, like we say, are used to branded content. Branded content can exist online in the way it does. There's restrictions on different platforms, and I think responsibility on YouTube is something that's been discussed for nearly half a decade now, and there are rules and protocols in place that make sure you are clearly advertising or marketing to audiences. Unless that changes and the platforms themselves clamp down, which is obviously an option, we're all at the mercy of YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. Unless something changes there, I think our future is to go in a similar direction, but keep strengthening those relationships so that instead of it just being, okay, Pepsi are going to give you access to this football player for 15 minutes and bish bash bosh, there's your sort of really brand friendly interview. It's like, let's build a relationship and they're going to give you half an hour and you can have more time, and it's actually more of the whole sort of, idealistic facilitating a better piece of content.
And have you kind of had to have that discussion, which is currently being had in the public? Are the social media platforms a media company, or are they ad companies? I can't remember how they've described it, but what is your take on social media platforms? Do you use them as a media company?
Yeah, for sure. I think they're both impressive and overwhelming and scary at the same time. The power with that Facebook wields is genuinely terrifying, whether it's from a marketing directly into our brains to influencing our political decisions. It is scary at times, but I think all we can do is like act with as much responsibility as possible on those platforms. And like you asked earlier, do we know where the line is when we're marketing to people? We do. We're not going to be like, go and buy these boots right now. I think influencers sitting in their bedroom who are probably far more popular than us on YouTube because of the way YouTube works, they will be more over, and they've been sort of had their hands, they've been told off, and go on.
No, it's just interesting because, influencers isn't something like we've primarily talked about tonight, but sometimes I'm invited to events quite often for brands, and they'll ask me to cover it editorial. So we do a lot of advertorial. It's not necessarily paid, but it's advertorial. And sometimes I'm surrounded by a younger demographic, and they're on their phones, and like, I literally have no idea what's going on. They're like on their phones and like doing all this stuff, and it's like, what is that? So it is a new discussion as well.
Do you guys ever worry that since there's an increasing amount of interest in the branded partnership space, that knowing that you don't own necessarily all of your audience on these social media platforms, that it might actually be another challenge down the line? If obviously the algorithm changes and, as Facebook starts to incentivize, or not incentivize, but to promote your grandma's cat photo, I don't know, something along those lines.
I mean, I think it just comes back to kind of audience loyalty, and it goes back to that fine line of like building a strong relationship with your audience, and that not only being through content, but... How
do you build that if you don't own, like if it's on a YouTube or it's on a Facebook or an Instagram? Like, how do you build a more direct relationship with them?
I think, that's why, I think especially at Cairo, we think about our shows as kind of franchises, and that means as well as them sitting on YouTube, there are events and there's merchandise, and it's a kind of like, we try to have as much a kind of direct relationship with our audience as possible in order to build something that doesn't feel like it just sits on this platform, which, feels quite flimsy.
Do you guys feel that there's value, like there's actual value in content, or does value only really come once you've slapped on an opportunity to sell something? Like content itself, seeing as it's so easy to create, like as I mentioned at dinner, we're kind of at the race to the bottom, and you had kind of a strong opinion of that.
I really think it depends what type of content you're talking about. I mean, I personally don't classify 90% of what's out there as content. I just find it as crap, like to be totally honest. But that's my thing, like I don't define it as content. I think we really have to draw the line as what is content. I think what I'm creating is content. It's genuine. It will live a long time. But everyone's got their idea of like content becomes very ephemeral. So one day it's good, and one day does that constitute as content? Not to me, but yeah.
I mean, you guys both obviously don't. You guys take a much more deliberate approach to the content you create as well. So does that maybe shelter you guys from this conversation in that there is still room for high quality content that's produced that takes time and effort versus the kind of frictionless stuff of me, putting something on my Instagram stories or Snapchat?
Yeah, I think, we try and do a bit of everything. We will spend 3 weeks on a highly produced documentary and it will look great, and we will spend 30 seconds on Snapchat messing around with whatever. And I think that just reflects the range of football fans, and the fact that some football fans are 16 and use Instagram stories or use Snapchat all the time, and that's how they consume stuff. I don't know. I think for me, I actually really like it because I'm somewhere in the middle demographically. I really enjoy the highly produced stuff, but I also really enjoy the just completely nonsensical, ephemeral stuff that's just really tongue-in-cheek, because at the end of the day, the reason why we exist to a young audience is we are that breath of fresh air in a really stuffy media landscape. At the moment, there are so many media companies and people creating content on a daily basis. Like, it's insane. And when you get cut through, it's when you are a bit more irreverent or you sidestep the hype and everyone's like, oh, hold on, these guys, they aren't just churning out stuff. Like, they actually have, whether it's personal, like, because you'll know, like, personality is exactly why people buy into that sort of thing, or whether it's the nature of the content itself because it's a little bit more rough already or whatever, that people like it too.
For you guys, as you start to, I guess, become more mature and experienced in the industry, how do you maintain a sort of clarity as to what your product is? So this is not really brand related, just like, how do you know that like what you're creating for Cairo now, like, does it have an opportunity to change and become more mature as you become more experienced?
Yeah, and I suppose as your audience change as well, it kind of, if you it's super important to listen to your audience. And I guess one of the real benefits of like if you publish on YouTube, is that you have a complete. I mean, it's a like blessing and a curse. Like you have complete access to like how popular your content is, and like people will be very vocal about how they feel about it, and simultaneously like there's a pressure to, like you described it as a race to the bottom earlier. Like there's a pressure to completely listen to like populist opinion on YouTube, and that can lead you down a whatever slippery slope to the bottom. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, to do, yeah.
Yeah, that race to the bottom is funny. Like it is true that you look at some of our competitors, and I'm not dragging through the mud or anything, but like you can see the thought process of like, okay, there's the bottom, there's how to get to it. Whether it's on Snapchat Discover and the way that publishers just horrendously clickbait or soft porn their audience into their stories, or whether it's on YouTube with like over the top shocking headlines and thumbnails and that sort of thing. And I think the challenge for us is the line in between, where we have the responsibility of being like, all right, we're not going to lure people in with some really awful image and a ridiculous headline.
Do you think that they're doing damage to their brands that they can't climb back from?
Do you know what? I don't even think they are. I think having looked at some of the people that do it,
something that I think is interesting, because the general shelf life or the general sentiment around negative press seems to be significantly shorter. So what's their ability to bounce back?
And also I think it's like, hey, their audience doesn't even, like, in the same way that branded content is just part of people's lives, like this race to the bottom is part of people's lives. Kids that have grown up with Snapchat, they're like, oh yeah, there's a tab where there's Daily Mail showing me soft porn and making me watch it. That's just how news works. And same way on YouTube, we're up against thumbnails where there's like a really shocking image and a headline, and the audience don't think the same way we do. They just go, oh cool, yeah, let's click on that. And the brand they're watching it from, they're not like, oh yeah, they're awful media publishers. They just go, oh yeah, cool, the content's fine. It's just part of life.
Yeah, I agree, but I do also think that like if you kind of like stay true to whether it's like a journalistic or an aesthetic or a stylistic or all of the above approach to the content you make, like it's sort of a long-term gain. I think that it means that you're not sort of sitting in amongst everyone at the bottom, and I think that the brands who want to work with you do have a lot of respect for you and do come to you because you're not doing that. What you're doing has like a stamp, it has an identity, and that's like worth something.
Ari, for you, as you start to build sort of this branded partnership opportunity or route, what have been your biggest challenges as a smaller publisher?
Oh, you name it, like A to Z. I mean, I think the biggest obstacle or the biggest barrier to creating a brand-ready media title is it's a bit chicken and egg, you know? So they want to see that you have a defined audience at a certain level, and they won't go there until you do. And then they also, maybe let me start again. That didn't really sum up exactly what I was saying. There are just so many obstacles, it is crazy. But in terms of like the biggest obstacle, I think it's just about, it really is the chicken and egg. So you need to build your business in order for it to be ready for a brand. But there are so many things that need to come first and last in order for a brand to want to speak to you.
Have brands ever been like, I want more of this from you? I need a larger audience, I need something.
No, because as I said, like we really, our number of conversations with brands has been extremely limited. And, we've been trying to kind of put our first foot forward and show that we are an incredibly reputable media brand, and that they should be working with us in certain aspects. But I think some brands in this day and age, in this ecosystem environment, are taking the bite of some cherries, and we hope that as long as we do what we do, they'll take a bite out of our cherries eventually in a certain way. But I think it's just, that's why I was talking about the type of crap that's out there and how ephemeral it is, because I think 10 years from now, a lot of the media channels that are around today, and this doesn't reflect you at all, I mean that, won't be around, because it's so easy to build an audience and a title reflecting the way that we live right now. But will it serve to reflect how an audience is in a year, 5 years, or 10 years? So, I hope that we can build something that's very strong. But yeah, the biggest obstacle has been, getting to that table with the brand, having that discussion so that we can show like that we're ready to do business, I think. Yeah.
And what about for you, Iona? You guys are about a year in, right? Yeah, with Kyra
so-
TV. What's been your challenge, like, as you kind of approach that intersection between brand and editorial and having your unique voice preserved?
Yeah, I think sort of as I've been saying, it's a fine line, and I think there's like for us, it's super important that we maintain and uphold this like aesthetic value that is important to us and an editorial integrity that's important to us. And I think we feel like we've crafted something really unique and original in all of our shows, and like staying true to that and kind of building on those foundations is really important, and working with brands has to sort of build upon that and not hinder anything we're doing.
Yeah.
Does that? Yeah.
Yeah. And you, Tom?
Echoing those sentiments completely. I think I think our branded content is pretty locked how we do things. It's been a few years now and we know exactly what we're doing when it comes to that space.
Do you guys feel that amidst all this, where, as money comes to the table and you guys are crafting like these perfect videos or whatnot, there's a pushback against that, where people want something a little bit more real?
Well, the brand wants something more real.
Just the
audience
consumer, yeah, like the person watching or following.
Yeah,
and they don't want
so.
something that's just polished.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's where the analogy used earlier of the church and state comes into play, because whichever one of those is the more raw version is where, we ring fence that and we say, all right, we're going to make a film about football derbies in Spain, and realistically it's going to involve violence and it's going to involve things which a brand aren't going to go near. Okay, yeah, San Miguel, you want to come sponsor this? No, because there's talk about beating the shit out of each other. Unfortunately, that's what the audience want to see. So let's ring fence that and make sure that the branded content sits alongside that, but we have that authenticity in a certain way.
Do you have a particular dream activation that you want to pursue, Ari?
Yeah, we'd love to do video. We get asked to do all types of things all the time. Because of the people we get access to, they're like, oh, why don't you do podcasts, and why don't you do video, and why don't you put out a book? And it's all money. It's just like, so, I'm just building on what these guys have been great in terms of building relationships with brands. But I actually feel if there's anyone out there in the audience here that has an independent media brand, I think there is a big space for an agency to act as an intermediary between brand and publisher, which I've never heard of. So an agency that helps define and bring your product to the brands to have that conversation. Because not every independent publisher will have all the contacts and the networks in order to kind of sell their wares to a brand. So I think it would be great to have an agency that kind of, defines and crafts your brand and brings it to the table of a brand in order to sell. But yeah, I would like to do all the above. It would be great.
What about you, Iona?
I think that ultimately what brands bring are money and an opportunity to tell the stories that you can't do on the budgets you're working with when you're doing editorial work and editorial video content. And so I guess a kind of personal thing is to be able to tell stories that are more difficult to get access to. And, ultimately that's what it all comes down to. We're all trying to tell stories in whatever form or to whatever audience, and brands sort of facilitate the ones that are fundamentally far more difficult to tell.
I think I only hit the nail on the head there, to be honest, but not too much more to add. Dream scenario, brands pay for you to go to the Russia World Cup and tell the story you want to tell, and they facilitate that.
Do you guys feel that brands in general have exercised a bit more awareness? So things that might have been off the table a few years ago, like whether it's race, whether it's sexuality, now it becomes something that's open for discussion.
Yeah, I have quite strong opinions on this subject, which I voiced a bit earlier, which is, I don't know, as a woman, but I do feel like a lot of kind of brands jumping on bandwagons or on kind of what is feminist, relevant.
What would be an example? Not necessarily naming names, just an example.
Okay, and I think kind of a good example is a lot of the women's marches that kind of came about last year. I think I feel like generally there's quite a strong sentiment at the moment with anything that's female focused to be quite politicized in a very, very for me, diluted way. And I feel like it's maybe just saying guys in their 30s at agencies being like, what's relevant to young women? And we end up with like brand sponsored content that feels like an appropriation of something that was relevant maybe 6 months or a year ago. Yeah, that's like a bit personal gripe.
How would you try to change that? Or do you think it's starting to change anyways?
I mean, obviously, the more women that are in positions of power or decision makers will obviously change that. I think that like it's probably no surprise that a lot of those campaigns that feel quite ineffective are probably not by like the audience themselves. I think, you know, stories or like opinions are best voiced by those who like have them or they affect.
Yeah.
So like, if you're trying to talk to women, probably get women to tell their stories.
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting point there, because like there's two things: there's adverts and there's branded content. And at one end of the spectrum, you've got like Pepsi last year doing the stuff they did, which obviously was a massive scandal, and you can imagine how much of a pain that was for us that day in the office with Pepsi, one of our clients. Obviously nothing to do with that, of course. And on the other end, you got branded content. And I think from our point of view, that's a really good point. Like brands want to jump on these bandwagons that are, you know, sometimes if it's in a pure advert, it can do good for the world because they use their money. But like for us, I think that's a line we wouldn't cross. It's like, all right, okay, we've done work on mental health before, but we'll do it directly with the charity. Or if you want to do something on whatever cause it is, the brand involvement needs to be, it can't just be a branded content point of view. It needs to be actually contributing to what's going on. If you're, say, I don't know, to an example, big X sports brand, and you want to do a piece on whatever cause is going on at the moment, rather than just be like a really superficial piece of content which does their job of looking like they're giving a shit, it'll be like, no, okay, let's look at how you can give a shit. Is your money going to go and actually influence in a proper way? Otherwise, we're not interested. That would be my point of view when it came to those things.
And just to kind of cap things off before we open the floor up for Q&A questions, is there anything in particular that you would want to change about the current sort of dynamic between a publisher and the advertising space? And do you feel that you have the opportunity to tell the story you want to tell already?
John also, okay. It's a really tough question. I think, you know, there are some brands who are kind of real early adopters and can see what, you know, especially Kyra's, you know, a year old and we're super young in this like grand scheme of things. And there are, brands who are real early adopters and see what you're doing and believe in that. And that's like an amazing feeling. I guess you want to see more of that.
Yeah, I think so. Like, we've got some brands that are very forward thinking on that front. The main thing I want to see is like people say, okay, I appreciate what this is. It's a piece of branded content. I've got a shitload of other campaigns going on which are going to put my can of drink in people's faces. Don't need to do that with this. I'm going to build brand affinity or achieve another objective and not have to, you know what it's like. People, client side, have so much pressure on them to say, all right, get the product here, do this, say this. And I think my ideal situation is people that take a deep breath and go like, okay, cool, this is branded content. It achieves a thing of doing this with an audience, but doesn't need to be so overt with it.
Do you think as your brand increases in scale, you have the ability to push back against anyone that's trying to influence what you believe to be the right thing, even if there's money on the table?
Yeah, I mean, like obviously, as you hear Harry speak, like money being on the table is a big factor, and often it's not my decision. But I think the balance is making sure that you aren't selling out for just for the sake of it, and that's easier said than done, of course. But yeah, I think so.
Do you have anything to add to that, Ari?
I mean, not really, because as again, like repeating myself, we've worked with brands in an advertorial way, but we haven't really done necessarily that many branded projects. But we'd love to do more. I think there just needs to be more support in the industry, because they think as you're starting a media brand, then all of a sudden you know exactly what you're doing and you understand how to do it. But I really think there needs to be more support, especially in this day and age when...
For independent publishers.
Absolutely. And I think that it's even harder because the trust level in media has gone down so much. I think for independent channels, I think it's important, especially if you have a good product.
Yeah. And I guess to cap it off, in terms of that thing about trust, how do you guys feel it's quite a simple, straightforward task of like a very binary choice. Either you're someone that you can trust or you cannot trust in terms of that, or do you feel as though like the minute you start kind of sliding down that path and you have that very small inkling of clickbait, that's when things start to fall, like the wheels start to fall off, so to say?
I'll jump in. I think you could, as Iona was saying earlier, ideally you build up that level of trust where people respect your brand enough that if you do something a little bit race to the bottom-y, that people will be like, okay, cool, we know what you're doing here, but we still appreciate you for you are.
Cool. Do you guys have anything else to add? No? Good? Yeah. Maybe we can open up the floor to some questions. Does anyone have any questions for our panelists? Yeah, go ahead.
Have you ever said no to a brand partnership? Or if you are in a brand partnership, have you ever had to say no to a brand for an idea they have?
Just so people in the back can hear, the question is, have you guys ever had to say no to a brand partner? And maybe under what context did you say no?
Please name names.
Where are you from? I think, to be candid with you, I think we never say no to begin with because we want to understand what the opportunity is. We're not going to be like, oh God, that's an evil brand that everyone hates. No, straight away we'll work out, okay, well, exactly what are their objectives. But I think a lot of the time later down the line, it's clear like this is going to either sit too negatively with football fans. If football fans are going to see you working with a certain person in the way they want to work, then yeah, there are times where we'll be like, no, I just think the amount of money that you pay us is going to alienate too much of our audience and have a financial negative later down the line.
Yeah, I think to kind of second that, I think often it's yes, and then when it makes no sense because you're either no longer being kind of true to what your product is, and they have too many like prerequisites for what they want, like the relationship can kind of fall apart. But I don't think there's ever like a no from the off if there's a kind of desire to work together from them, from a brand.
Because like, for example, we were approached years ago during the Euros by Turkish Airlines, which on the face of it, we were like, okay, well, they haven't got any relevance with football, our audience don't care about them, why should we do anything? But then they were like, we're going to facilitate a piece of content, what do you want to make? And we're like, well, actually, a piece of content where we fly around to several other countries competing in the Euros just before the tournament starts and understanding their culture from a football perspective and other perspectives. Obviously, airlines, that makes a lot of sense traveling, but like, for us, actually, yeah, that's interesting and that has got to appeal to our audience, and maybe we shouldn't immediately go, okay, yeah, this isn't as seamless and smooth as Adidas, but it's still got to appeal.
Do you think it's a testament to your guys' creative ability to make brands that might not seem to work?
Yeah, definitely. I think Copper Night is actually pretty good in that, having worked in traditional advertising and social media before. I think if we had some of the creatives that we had back in those industries, it'd be a lot more shoehorned. Whereas we're quite natural with the way we do things, and it's like, all right, yeah, Turkish Airlines want to do this, let's push back because we know that this is a far more authentic way of telling it.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's mostly for Copper 90. I know, like, I'm quite interested in how your channel works, and specifically, like, you mentioned Poet and Vood, and they do FIFA and Chill, so they're playing FIFA with like Pogba or whoever it is, and that does really well. And those seem to be the guys that get the most like branded stuff around them. Like it was Vood that did the interview with like Stormzy and Beckham and everything for the kit launch. Was it Manchester United? Yeah. Right. Okay. And then you've got Ellie, who does the stuff like the Derby Days, and he'll go and do like much more kind of. Like he'll do fan-focused stuff, and it gets a bit more into like politics and news and things like that. So I was wondering, do you kind of use the money that you get from like the Vood and Poet stuff, which they're kind of influencers in their own right? They have like followings of like over 100,000 people on like Twitter or Instagram to kind of fund the stuff that you want to do, which is kind of in line with your project as like like removing yourself from the kind of lad culture and having this different space that's a bit more serious. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, so for the sake of the audience, to reduce that, but like, is it essentially, are we using branded money to fund the editorial we want to create? In specific answer to your question though, I think, yeah, the Poem Vood stuff, in all honesty, like there isn't too much brand involvement with what they do. For whatever reason, they're quite outspoken people, and it's quite hard to say to a brand, these guys are going to say whatever they want. They, like, from the nature of the personalities, if you say, oh, you can't say this, this or this, they're like, that's not how we operate. And it's like, okay, well, the brand aren't going to be involved. Adidas did set up the Beckham and Stormzy thing. That's a sort of example of when it can work. And Ellie has done stuff like the Turkish Airlines thing before, was him as well. I'd say it does work in that sense that the branded stuff fuels the editorial that can't be sponsored. Ellie's political, more fan-focused things that could never be sponsored. So the money needs to come from somewhere, but it's not necessarily the Poem Vouge stuff. FIFA and Chill isn't sponsored. We've had people interested, but that it's not sponsored as it stands. It comes from other areas of the business where it's normally branded content, not featuring those presenters specifically, that then fuels the other stuff.
Does anyone else have any other questions? Yeah, in the back.
Do you actively try to identify who your audience is, or do you kind of go with the approach of as long as you're creating content that you find authentic and true, it doesn't matter who it's really being disseminated to?
So the question is, do you just create what you want to create and let them come to you, or do you tailor content towards your audience? Maybe you can start with that, Ari.
Yeah, there's definitely a thread. It's a good question because originally when I started out, I was just like, I want to do what I want to do and I just enjoy it. And that's how anyone should do it as a publisher. But, eventually things develop and you're building a business out of it. So you've got to set, parameters. And I now have a thread. So yes, I will feel a little bit uncomfortable. We get pitches all the time from people about, can we feature this and feature this? I'm like, no, we don't feel certainly comfortable with that. So I do definitely put it within the 52 Insights parameter, and I continue to do that. And it's evolved to a point where, it just kind of rolls and the content kind of enjoys itself, if that makes sense.
Would you ever widen your parameters if that meant sort of greater accessibility to brand partnerships?
I see this as the key running theme tonight. No, I mean, it makes sense. I mean,
principles are pretty locked in, you'd say.
Not at all, no. No, they're the other way.
Other way around, okay.
Yeah. Look, to be totally honest with you, when I started the magazine, I was like, we'll get all these names and then the brands and the audience will come. It would just be super easy. That's originally, I was so fucking naive, it's ridiculous. I'm just trying to be as honest as I can. So, a year and a half into the 3 years, I was like, wow, that's not really happening. Now I'm going to have to change things up and I'm going to have to kind of reiterate, what's my selling point? Because for these guys, they've built a module or a brand where brands come and say, hey, can we do this with your audience? Because you have a key theme that they want to exploit, which is fine. I'm kind of the same, but perhaps in a bit more of a niche market, I don't know. So now I have to kind of sell a different aspect. But no, I wouldn't be opposed at all to having a conversation with the brand, like Tom said, exploring the opportunity first. I mean, if it's McDonald's wants to buy my site, I'd probably exit and they can buy it, to be honest with you. But they can have it. I'm joking, but you know what I mean.
Just to add at that point, it's a really interesting question. I think that like as a creator or a storyteller or whatever you call yourself, I think it's always going to be super important that there's passion from you about what you're creating, and that's how you'll end up making the best content or telling the best stories. And doing audience analysis and being like, these are the touch points, probably isn't going to end up making the best content, or you're not going to end up making your best work. So, there's probably elements of awareness that are intrinsically important if you want to create something that's sustainable financially.
Yeah, I agree. You want to tell the story you want to tell, regardless of who it's to. There are times that you want to kind of optimize and be like, all right, well, got a really interesting story about these ultras in a Chinese football team that you'd never heard of, and I can tell it in the way that I will find appealing, or I can tell it in a way that an 18-year-old kid will find appealing, and actually that's going to have far more reach and be far more interesting. So I'd say the story comes first, and sometimes you'll tailor it to the audience, and other times you'll just do what you want to do.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Which media formats do you think have the most authenticity, whether actual authenticity or perceived authenticity? Is it something with a short shelf life, like a piece of content that disappears on social, or is it something more tangible, for example, in print?
That's a good question. So the question is, which medium lends itself to the most authentic sort of format? Is it print, video, podcast, etc.?
Depends which audience, really. Different audiences consume different things.
Yeah, and I'd say that in each of those verticals, you've got examples on both sides that you could say slightly less authentic or very, very authentic. I think there are plenty of examples of both, like, you know, print media that we'd say is like really, really not authentic, and a race to the bottom next to like very, very old school authentic journalism. It's the same in each of those. I think it's pretty hard to say, define it by like its medium.
Yeah, you have to find those nuggets, I guess. There's people like us that do actively strive, maybe because the people that work there and being these creative stroke storytellers, like Iona says, and they'll exist in traditional papers as well. There's journalists that you meet that, you know, have the pressures of the people above saying, write this or write that, and they're like, oh, fuck's sake, I've got to write an article on this just to get hits. But as long as the individuals are there that are like, actually, do you know what, once in a while I'm going to go off and make this niche story that I think people care about. I think you can't really single out one media for being more authentic. It's just finding the ones within each media that do it better than others.
If I could add my 2 cents, I personally think podcasts are the most authentic because there's less, and obviously MAEKAN is very audio driven, but to that point, I think what's great about podcasts is that you can just let the tape run, and you don't have the same sort of limitation of video where you have to have beautiful B-roll to kind of be in tandem with that. So that to me is like listening to people, like easy to have like a 60-minute conversation with someone, where it's very difficult to cut out select parts because at the end of the day, it's just a conversation. We have time for one more question if anyone wants to ask it. I think that's everyone. Before we cap things off, maybe you guys can let everyone know how they can get in touch with you. Let's start at the end, Tom.
Yeah, sure. Come up to me afterwards if you want to get in touch with me, and I'll let you
Or
know.
do you have like a Twitter or anything?
Yeah, well, my Twitter's Tom Brandy if you want to follow me. Get me up to that coveted 600 followers that I've been aiming for a while.
Yeah. Iona?
Yeah, Twitter, Instagram, or come talk to me afterwards.
Yeah.
Twitter, Facebook, websites www.52-insights.com.
Yeah, definitely check out 52 Insights. I'm a big fan of it. I'm glad Ari could make it. And once again, Iona, Tom, thank you very much for you guys' time. Soho House, you guys were awesome. I really appreciate the opportunity to come all the way from Hong Kong and do this. Tom, maybe you stand up, give a little bow. This is all you, bro. Yeah. Thank you very much, guys. Have a good night.